We all want that luscious, vibrant root growth on our orchids because we know what it's going to bring. A healthier orchid and more flowers. But sometimes we battle on getting those roots to actually start growing. With just a little bit of understanding on what makes roots grow and how to get them to grow, so we can get them to grow successfully in abundance and have happy, wonderful plants. Let's get straight into it. And welcome to the Nature Company. If this is the kind of information you're interested in, please hit that subscribe button down below and that notification bell to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. There's several different reasons that you may need your orchid to grow roots. Maybe you've rotted off the old roots in the pot, or you've done divisions and want the new divisions to be rooted, or the old canes have fallen off, or you want to propagate from your old canes and you need those shoots to develop roots so you can get strong plants out of them. Trying to get healthy roots for your orchids can sometimes be problematic. The whole process inside your plant is regulated by plant hormones, the auxins and the cytokinins. The cytokinins are the ones that produce the top growth, and the auxins are the ones that produce the root growth. We need a balance between these to get the ideal growth of your orchids. These hormones are often regulated by your temperatures, your humidity, your watering or water availability, and the light conditions. So often your orchids go through stages of either top growth, root growth, or top and root growth together, and then stages of dormancy. It's all got to do with their seasons. And the seasons are the ones that produce those, obviously, those different temperatures, those different light hours, the different strength of your light, and your humidity levels. So when we're trying to force roots to grow on an orchid, we have to then be able to control these factors in such a way that we can convince your orchid to then produce more roots. It's not always easy. That's often why we have to then rely on chemical intervention. Those auxins that we are speaking about, we have to occasionally use them to help force out roots or new growth on your orchid so that they can then produce those roots that we are looking for. And still then, we're then going to have to control those climatic conditions around your orchid to ensure that they can then produce those roots successfully. Generally, as a rule of thumb, orchids like daytime temperatures between 21 to 29 degrees Celsius for optimal growth, and that's around 70 to 85 degrees Fahrenheit. So we need to try and keep our orchids in that sort of range for them to promote healthy root growth. Also, evening temperatures can then dip slightly lower because with those seasonal changes that help the orchid regulate its hormone levels and then regulate that root and top growth to produce healthy orchids. Orchids, being mostly epiphytic, often have their roots out in the open, so humidity levels are hugely important, especially if you're trying to get an orchid without any roots to root themselves again. Invariably, orchids would prefer an environment with between 50 to 70% humidity as a general broad range of humidity levels that are most suited. But when you're having struggling orchids or want to force roots, then humidity chambers. Little chambers where you can control or increase your humidity levels and still keep warmer temperatures, especially if you want to raise the temperature around the orchid that you're trying to root. So with many orchids, especially with your cattleyas, you'll have orchids that only produce new roots off their new growth. So you'll get pre-flowering rooting cattleyas and post-flowering rooting cattleyas. This one we can see the new root is coming off the new growth. So this is one of those ones that will only root before flowering. And then your flowering will come off your new growth and it will have already set all the roots that it needs for the year. And the only new roots it's then going to produce again is off that new growth again. Especially when propagating cattleyas off back bulbs like we have here, you always need to ensure which ones you're doing it with so you know how to look after and how long you're going to have to look after your plant before it will actually set roots. The pre-flowering rooters will always be easier to propagate from their back bulbs. With things like dendrobiums, when we're trying to get kikis to grow off dendrobium stems or the pseudobulbs, all we have to do is try and increase the humidity levels around them So one of the ways we can do this is by using a media that is going to hold moisture but allow the water to drain away. We can lay the Dendrobium cane across the top, and those humidity levels around it are going to be high enough to allow these roots to form successfully. With orchids like Phalaenopsis, one of the best ways to get Phalaenopsis to root successfully is by ensuring you misting the surface of the media fairly frequently to increase that humidity level around your plant and allow it then to send out those roots to look for that moisture, and you'll land up with all these amazing beautiful roots coming out of the stem of your plant. With Brassicas, often you'll find it's only as the plant is producing new shoots again, you'll get all those new roots. You'll often find you won't get any new root growth off old pseudobulbs. It will all happen off those new bulbs that grow off the base of your plant. Also, when a plant has been struggling either from root rot or something and then has moved to a better environment, you'll notice that they don't flower. The plant itself then concentrates its growth on those roots to form a new root system so that the plant can then grow healthily again. So if all those roots have been damaged, rotten off or dried out, often the plant will alter its growth habit from being a top growth back to being a root growth to try and produce more roots so that it can then absorb all those nutrients it needs to carry on growth. So often an orchid itself will control that to some degree, especially if it's been given those right conditions that it needs to survive, which are, of course, again, your temperature, your humidity, the correct amount of water. Because remember, too much water is going to rot all the roots that you're trying to produce. Often, sometimes you need to make the water available as humidity rather than moisture in the media itself, because this way the orchid then produces those roots to go in search of that moisture. But it can still absorb that moisture from the air, but it's looking to find out where it can actually get more moisture from. So that's what causes it to produce longer, stronger roots. So that's why misting around the base of your orchids is often a really good idea, just to provide that extra bit of atmospheric moisture that the plant can then still absorb but can go out and actively seek. When it comes to using rooting hormones, we often only use it when it comes to those dire situations when there's, like for instance on the back bulbs, especially on Cymbidiums, we like to use that little dash of rooting hormone on the base of the pseudobulb just to give those back bulbs just a little kickstart they need to help produce those new shoots and roots. It's often just to kick those hormones out of balance, just so the plant wakes up and doesn't just go into a dormant phase. And when using plant hormones, remember to be judicial. Rather go with too little than too much, because if you're trying to force too many roots with too little top growth, you may inhibit the top growth completely, and without the top growth, your roots will slowly die again. You want to make sure that you have that balance correct in your hormones. So when it comes to rooting of your orchids or forcing roots on your orchids, it's not always the easiest thing. Certain of your orchids' physiological programming will not allow forcing of roots. They'll only happen at specific points in their growth phase. If you're able to manipulate your lighting, your temperatures, and your humidity levels well enough to confuse the plant completely for long enough periods, then perhaps you might be able to kick it out of its natural phases and start another growth phase that it wouldn't be in. But that's not always the easiest thing to do. Certain of your orchids go completely dormant and they're just really not going to produce any growth in that dormant phase, like your Cissus, your Catasetums, and certain of the Dendrobiums too. They'll lose all their leaves and just sit back and relax for a while. Let them do it so that they can gather all that energy to produce those amazing blooms. Because it's only after those amazing blooms have come out that they'll start producing that new growth that will produce new roots for the continued growth of the plant. Often with orchids, it's never the old section of the orchid itself that will produce the new roots, it's only the new section. So as your orchid keeps growing along, the old section will slowly lose its root volume and the new section will take off completely, almost as an individual plant. So that's why it's best to keep your repotting to those times where your orchid is going to be producing those roots at its maximum. And remember, those little root buds, as they start coming out, are very delicate. Try to not break any of those off because it's going to make it more and more difficult for that orchid to produce more roots. There's only a certain number of meristematic points that will produce roots, and if you damage them all, you won't get any further root growth until your orchid has managed to grow further to produce more of those meristematic points, but it's not got any energy because it doesn't have any roots. This is why roots are so important to healthy orchids. Also, another way of producing humidity in your environment, if you don't like the drip trays or water buckets hanging around your orchids, is by using a larger vase and putting some oasis at the bottom that you can then pour water in. Sit your orchid pot on top so it's not sitting in the water, but all that water is slowly going to be evaporating up and produce humidity for your plant. So it's one way of allowing your plant to be right next to that water, but without sitting in it all the time. So you're supplying humidity to your plant so it can then produce those roots to go in search of the water. Ensuring that you get the maximum root growth, you have to ensure that you have the optimal potting medium for your orchid itself. Ensure that it's well aerated, all those big air gaps inside, and still well drained. So anything, depending on the type of orchid you have, from your barks to your sphagnum mosses to your charcoal, or mixes of all of them together. All depends on the orchid and its specific requirements, and of course the environment that you can provide for it. Without bringing all of these factors together successfully, you're always going to battle, and you can't always rely on one single person's experience, because your specific environment in your home could be completely different. So take on as much advice as possible and try different recipes to see which one works the best for your environment and your watering techniques. Rather try and understand your orchid than just taking someone else's advice. When it comes to fertilizing, you need to understand your orchid's needs for fertilizer, especially rootless ones or ones that are just beginning to root. We can't go over fertilize these, because what's going to happen is you're going to land up with a salt concentration on the top of your media, and as those new roots start to protrude out, they're going to be burnt by that excess salts that is in your media, and it will just kill off the ends, because those root tips are really sensitive. It's all brand new root growth, or those new cells, as they're extending out, they're going to be extremely affected by excess in salts or fertilizers that is going to burn them really easily. So go gentle with your fertilization while your plant is producing those new roots. Rather, again, go too little than too much. So use weak fertilizer solutions, especially in those beginning stages of your root development. But there's one little secret. Some of those organic fertilizers can help balance your orchid's hormonal system to help it produce roots. But more on that in the Buy Me a Coffee link down below. Please consider becoming a member. And thank you for watching. If you found any of this information helpful, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button down below, and that notification bell, bing bong, to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. Help us grow as we help your orchids grow.